Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Ayasoma speaking. Welcome to our second Sutta study class. I see Adriana, Junie, Cam online. Hello, good morning. So there is, I believe, the link to the Sutta on top, so you can download it there. And then if you have any questions, feel free to put them on the live chat, and then Bante will answer them as soon as after we read the sutta together. All right. So Bante is miking himself up.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, good morning, everyone, or good evening if you're on the other side of the world. So this evening, this morning, whatever it is, Today we'll be looking at Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 8, the Sallekha Sutta, which I had translated here as humility. So this word Sallekha, it's made of two parts. So the first part is a contraction of sayang, which means self or oneself. The second part, lekha, literally means to scratch. So this word Sallekha is sometimes translated as self-effacement, but that kind of gives the impression of diminishing oneself. So the implication here is one of eroding one's ego, of diminishing one's sense of ego, one's sense of self-attachment and self-importance. So it's translated here as humility to give a simpler and more direct meaning to this word. So as before, I'll read through the sutta and periodically give explanations as we go through it. The sutta begins. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park. Then in the evening, Venerable Mahachunda emerged from seclusion, approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When he was seated to one side, Venerable Mahachunda said to the Blessed One, Bhante, there are many kinds of perspectives that arise in the world, connected with beliefs about self, or beliefs about the world. Bhante, when he is just beginning, what should a monk pay attention to so that these perspectives are abandoned and relinquished? So this is the opening question for this sutta. So on this case, a monk named Venerable Mahachunda goes to the Buddha and says that there's many different kinds of opinions and viewpoints and beliefs that people have about the nature of the self and the nature of the world. And Venerable Mahachunda asks how a monk who's just starting his practice can develop his mind so that he can let go of these opinions and perspectives. So this shows that Venerable Mahachunda is already pretty sharp, pretty clear on what needs to be done, and that he recognizes that holding opinions and viewpoints about oneself or about the world is already an obstacle to the development of one's practice. So the Buddha answers, Chunda, there are many kinds of perspectives that arise in the world, connected with beliefs about self or beliefs about the world. Where these perspectives arise, where they lay dormant, and where they occur, one sees them as they are with correct discernment in this way. This is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. In this way, these perspectives are abandoned and relinquished. So here the Buddha gives a fairly direct answer to this question. So first he acknowledges what Venerable Mahachunda said, that there's all these different kinds of opinions and viewpoints, either connected to some kind of belief or opinion or doctrine about self, about an eternal soul or self-existence, or something connected with the nature of the world. So there's all these different perspectives and viewpoints. And the Buddha said, wherever those viewpoints arise, where they lay dormant, so the Pali word here is anusenti, which is from the same root as the word anusaya. So anusaya is the underlying tendency. Or where they, how is it translated here? Where they occur. So the Pali word here is samudacharati, which also has the implication of something attacking you. So he gives 3 examples. So whenever one of these perspectives arises, whenever it's not currently arising, but there's a tendency in that direction, some kind of underlying tendency towards it, or when they're fully appearing, when they're fully occurring, when they, again, when it seems like they're assailing us. And for me, when reading this description that the Buddha is giving, the implication to me is this is happening inside one's own mind. So in your own mind, when you see these kinds of viewpoints or perspectives or opinions arising, or when you recognize a tendency to think in this way or to have these kinds of viewpoints, or when you feel like your mind is overwhelmed and flooded with these different viewpoints and opinions, so either opinions about the nature of yourself or opinions about the nature of the world, then one should reflect. One should see them as they are, as not mine, not me, and not myself. So this is particularly important when looking at the thoughts that appear in our mind, because very often, in fact, most of the time, we think that the thoughts and opinions and viewpoints that occur in our mind are who we are. We think that they belong to us. But actually, the thoughts and views and perspectives that float through our mind are mostly conditioned by the world around us. They're mostly conditioned by what we hear and what we see. They're mostly conditioned by what we encounter in society, by the messages and conditionings that we get from our culture. So we think this is my viewpoint, this is my opinion, this is my perspective, this is my tendency. We think this is who I am. But actually, the vast majority of it is coming from external conditions. It's coming from cultural conditioning or from things that we pick up through reading and hearing and seeing. So whatever appears in the mind, connected with some kind of rigid viewpoint about self or about the world, we reflect, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. And the Buddha says, in this way, these perspectives are abandoned and relinquished. So then the Buddha gets into defining the term Sallekha, which again is translated here as humility. The Buddha says, Chunda, it is possible that, secluded from sensuality and from unwholesome phenomena, a monk might attain and remain in the first jhana, which has thought, examination, and the rapture and happiness born from seclusion. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living happily here and now in the discipline of the noble ones. So the Buddha starts with a description of what is not Sallekha, what is not humility, what is not eroding our sense of ego. And he starts by going through the jhanas. And a little bit of a preview. He goes through the first 4 jhanas and then through the 4 immaterial attainments, the 4 immaterial jhanas. So in total, the 8, what's sometimes called the 8 jhanas in the suttas. And with each one, he gives the same statement. This is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. Because, again, these states of concentration, which we call jhana, these states of deep stillness and clarity of mind, they're very peaceful, but they do not produce permanent changes in the nature of our experience. They produce temporary changes. They're peaceful for a period of time. They're perhaps joyful for a period of time. It can seem for a period of time like we're not self-obsessed, like there's no fixation on me, no fixation on our sense of self. But when we emerge from concentration, when we emerge from jhana, then if we have not been cultivating wisdom and insight, if we have not been cultivating the insight into the nature of impermanence and not self, then when we emerge from concentration, then all of our old tendencies will start to resurface. They'll start to arise again. They'll start to float back to the surface of the mind. They'll start to manifest in our experience again. So just practicing concentration meditation every now and then, or even many hours a day, is not necessarily going to wear away our ego. It's not necessarily going to help us develop genuine humility in the sense of eroding our attachment to self. They're still worth practicing. So the Buddha praises the development of jhana all throughout the suttas. All throughout the suttas, he talks about the value of training the mind in samadhi. So training the mind in collectedness, in non-dispersion, in non-distraction, then training the mind in holding still, in being clear and steady. So the Buddha places great importance on the development of jhana. But in the sutta, he's starting by emphasizing that just practicing jhana, just practicing samadhi meditation is not going to erode our sense of self. It's not going to erode our self-centeredness. So I'm not going to go into a lot of description on jhana in this sutta. There's one of the later suttas that I'll be talking about goes into more detail on the nature of jhana, so I won't go into it at this point. So I'll just read quickly through the section here on samadhi states before we get into the heart of this discourse. So the Buddha continues, Chunda, it is possible that with the abatement of thought and evaluation, a monk might attain and remain in the second jhana, which has internal serenity, mental focus, no thought, no evaluation, and has the rapture and happiness produced by concentration. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living happily here and now in the discipline of the noble ones. That's the second jhana. Chunda, it is possible that with the fading of rapture, a monk might attain and remain in the third jhana, and is equanimous, mindful, and completely aware, experiencing happiness through the body. What the noble ones call one who is equanimous, mindful, and happy. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living happily here and now in the discipline of the noble ones. So that's the third jhana. Chunda, it is possible that with the abandoning of pleasure and pain and with the prior disappearance of elation and depression, a monk might attain and remain in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant and has purity of mindfulness and equanimity. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living happily here and now in the discipline of the noble ones. Chunda, it is possible that by completely transcending all perceptions of form, with the disappearance of perception of resistance, and by not paying attention to perceptions of diversity, perceiving infinite space, a monk might attain and remain in the dimension of infinite space. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living peacefully in the discipline of the noble ones. So here, the Buddha's gone through the first four jhanas, and now he's talking about the four immaterial attainments. So these are perceptions where one no longer has any experience of the physical world. So these are completely mental experiences, which can happen in states of deep samadhi when one directs the mind in a particular way. So the first one he mentions is directing the mind towards the perception of infinite space. So just infinite empty space with no physical objects to be found. Again, this does not erode our ego. It's just a temporary experience that can happen when we train the mind in a particular way. It's worth noting here, by the way, that here the Buddha switches from saying living happily here and now to saying living peacefully. So for these four immaterial attainments, he refers to them as living peacefully. So it continues. Chunda, it is possible that by completely transcending the dimension of infinite space, perceiving infinite consciousness, a monk might attain and remain in the dimension of infinite consciousness. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living peacefully in the discipline of the noble ones. Chunda, it is possible that by completely transcending the dimension of infinite consciousness, perceiving nothing existing, a monk might attain and remain in the dimension of nothingness. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living peacefully in the discipline of the noble ones. Chunda, it is possible that by completely transcending the dimension of nothingness, a monk might attain and remain in the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. He might think, I am living with humility. Chunda, this is not what is called humility in the discipline of the noble ones. This is called living peacefully in the discipline of the noble ones. Chunda, this is how you are to practice humility. So here the Buddha finally starts to define what he means by Sallekha, what he means by humility or erosion of the ego. He says, others will be cruel. We will not be cruel. This is how to practice humility. Others will kill. We will not kill. This is how to practice humility. Others will steal. We will not steal. This is how to practice humility. Others will live a non-spiritual life. We will live a spiritual life. This is how to practice humility. Others will lie. We will not lie. This is how to practice humility. Others will speak divisively. We will not speak divisively. This is how to practice humility. Others will speak harshly. We will not speak harshly. This is how to practice humility. Others will speak frivolously. We will not speak frivolously. This is how to practice humility. Others will covet. We will not covet. This is how to practice humility. Others will be aversive. We will not be aversive. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong view. We will have right view. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong attitude. We will have right attitude. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong speech. We will have right speech. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong action. We will have right action. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong livelihood. We will have right livelihood. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong effort. We will have right effort. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong mindfulness. We will have right mindfulness. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong concentration. We will have right concentration. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong knowledge. We will have right knowledge. This is how to practice humility. Others will have wrong liberation. We will have right liberation. This is how to practice humility. Others will be overcome by torpidity and dullness. We will be free of torpidity and dullness. This is how to practice humility. Others will be agitated. We will not be agitated. This is how to practice humility. Others will be skeptical. We will be beyond skepticism. This is how to practice humility. Others will be angry. We will not be angry. This is how to practice humility. Others will be resentful. We will not be resentful. This is how to practice humility. Others will denigrate. We will not denigrate. This is how to practice humility. Others will be malicious. We will not be malicious. This is how to practice humility. Others will be envious. We will not be envious. This is how to practice humility. Others will be stingy. We will not be stingy. This is how to practice humility. Others will be fraudulent. We will not be fraudulent. This is how to practice humility. Others will be deceitful. We will not be deceitful. This is how to practice humility. Others will be stubborn. We will not be stubborn. This is how to practice humility. Others will be conceited. We will not be conceited. This is how to practice humility. Others will be hard to speak to. We will be easy to speak to. This is how to practice humility. Others will have evil friends. We will have good friends. This is how to practice humility. Others will be negligent. We will not be negligent. This is how to practice humility. Others will lack faith. We will have faith. This is how to practice humility. Others will lack conscience. We will have conscience. This is how to practice humility. Others will lack consideration. We will have consideration. This is how to practice humility. Others will know little. We will know much. This is how to practice humility. Others will be lazy. We will be energetic. This is how to practice humility. Others will be absent-minded. We will have firmly established mindfulness. This is how to practice humility. Others will be unwise. We will be consummate in wisdom. This is how to practice humility. Others will hold tightly to their opinions and relinquish them with difficulty. We will not hold tightly to our opinions, and we will relinquish them easily. This is how to practice humility. So that's the list that the Buddha gives in this sutta. So a quite comprehensive overview of Buddhist practice. In fact, there's some monasteries I know of which chant this every morning because he gives such a thorough, precise, and succinct overview of a wide variety of ways of practicing. And again, notice that the majority of what the Buddha refers to here is activities in everyday life. So things that we do, things that we say, ways that we behave. So the majority of this is not anything whatsoever to do with meditation practice. The majority of this is in the domain of morality. It's in the domain of generosity. It's in the domain of ordinary, everyday goodness. So at this point, I'll go back through the list and pick out a few that I think are worth giving a bit more explanation of. First off, it's interesting to note that the very first thing he says is, others will be cruel, we will not be cruel. So he actually starts right off the bat with emphasizing the importance of keeping a mind which is free of cruelty. So developing a mind of compassion. Then he goes through the first 4 of the 5 precepts. So not killing, not stealing, and not lying. And then he mentions others will live a non-spiritual life. We will live a spiritual life. So for those who are monastics, that includes the practices of celibacy. For those who are not monastics, that includes being restrained in our sexual conduct, so being respectful towards other people in sexual conduct. But it's important to note that the Pali term here, brahmacharya, means a lot more than just how we relate to sexual activity, but rather it does quite literally mean a spiritual life. So living a life which is built around spiritual practice, living a life which prioritizes spiritual practice, living a life which is built around placing importance upon developing our hearts, which is built around the importance of cultivating wisdom and compassion. So then he says, others will speak divisively, harshly, and frivolously. We will not speak divisively, harshly, or frivolously. So this is the part of the explanation of right speech. So not speaking falsely, divisively, harshly, or frivolously. So it's incredibly important to watch our speech, to pay attention to what we're saying, why we're saying it, and what effect our speech is having. So it's particularly important whenever there's any kind of crisis situation, whenever anything particularly harmful or dangerous is going on. It's particularly important that we not make things worse by sowing the seeds of contention, by setting people against each other. So not speaking divisively. It's very important to be gentle and kind in how we relate to each other. So not speaking harshly. And also it's important to make sure that the words that we're speaking, the statements that we're making are of value, that they bring benefit to others, that they bring benefit to the world around us. So not speaking uselessly or pointlessly. But as the Buddha says elsewhere in the suttas in a number of places, rather to speak words that are worth treasuring, words that will be valued by the people who hear them. So he says, we will not covet. So cultivating a mind of contentment. So not constantly thinking about what we want or what we wish we had or how much we wish we could get something in particular, but rather being content with what we have. Asking ourselves, do I have enough? And if we ask ourselves that question with all seriousness, then the answer is almost always yes. Like, yes, I have enough. Yes, I can get by. No, I don't need anything else. So if you really need something, that's a different story. Then, of course, if you really need something, then you do what you can to get it in an appropriate way, in a moral way, in an upright and wholesome way. But if you don't really genuinely need something, then don't bother. Don't waste your mental effort in craving something and coveting something. Develop contentment and the sense of happiness with what you already have. Others will be aversive. We will not be aversive. One reason why we've been doing loving kindness meditation lately. Then the Buddha goes through the Noble Eightfold Path. And the form that's used here is actually the Tenfold Path. So a slightly less common version that we see in a few suttas, where the Buddha gives not 8 factors, to the path, but 10. So the first 8 are the familiar ones. So others will have wrong view, we will have right view. So right view is understanding the Four Noble Truths. It's understanding karma, understanding cause and effect. It's understanding rebirth. It's understanding impermanence. It's understanding dukkha. It's understanding not self. So it's cultivating, at the bare minimum, an intellectual acceptance of these things. But as our practice develops, this becomes more and more a direct perception of how we see the world. And wrong view, of course, would be rejecting any of those things, in whole or in part. Next, he talks about wrong attitude and right attitude. So wrong attitude is the attitude of cruelty, the attitude of harmfulness, the attitude of wanting others to suffer. And it's the attitude of attachment, the attitude of craving. And on the flip side, right attitude is the attitude of renunciation, the attitude of compassion, the attitude of harmlessness. Others will have wrong speech. We will have right speech. So I covered that earlier. Others will have wrong action. We will have right action. So right action is refraining from killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Others will have wrong livelihood. We will have right livelihood. So wrong livelihood is any kind of occupation, any kind of work that causes harm to sentient beings. In any way, whether direct or indirect. And right livelihood then is any kind of livelihood which does not cause harm to any sentient beings, and optimally a form of livelihood that brings benefit to the world, that brings benefit to to living beings, ourselves as well as others. Then others will have wrong effort, we will have right effort. So right effort, briefly speaking, is the effort to keep unwholesome mind states out of our mind and to develop wholesome mind states. That's pretty direct. Others will have wrong mindfulness. We will have right mindfulness. So at this point, you might be thinking, but I thought mindfulness was always right. But it depends on what you direct your mind towards. So elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha speaks about choosing what we point the mind towards. Because if we point the mind towards certain kinds of things, then our defilements get worse. And if we point our mind towards other things, our defilements decrease. So it's noticing what happens when we direct our attention in particular ways. If we direct our attention to things that we despise, things that we hate, then we might find that our aversion and hatred gets worse. Whereas if we fixate our attention on things that we like, things that we crave, then we might find that our desire and attachment gets worse. So those are examples of wrong mindfulness. It's directing the mind in ways that worsens our defilements. Rather than diminishing them. Others will have wrong concentration. We will have right concentration. So this is another distinction that we find in the suttas. So right concentration is defined as the 4 jhanas, which are characterized by sharpness and clarity of knowing. So in right concentration, one's mind is steady and still, but it is extremely clear and sharply aware of its experience. By contrast, wrong concentration is defined as concentration without awareness. So states of trance or states of fixation, where one's mind is steady and still, but it's dull and hazy. It does not clearly know or understand its experience. So that's wrong concentration, which is not useful in Buddhist practice. So in Buddhist practice, for concentration to be right, for samadhi to be beneficial, there must be this faculty of being clearly aware of the experience that one is having. Then he goes into the 9th and 10th factors, which are right knowledge and right liberation. So right knowledge is the direct knowing of things as they are, which in Buddhism, the Buddha clearly describes that when one cultivates this direct knowing, it's completely unshakable in one's mind. Like there's no shred of doubt that one knows reality as it is, that one is seeing reality as it is. So wrong knowledge would be when one has convinced oneself of something which is not true. So one example of this is in the course of our spiritual practice, sometimes we hit a layer of the mind which seems solid, something which seems unchangeable. And at this point, sometimes the wrong view arises. This is myself. This is my soul. This is my true, eternal, unchanging self. This is my true self nature. That's an example of wrong knowledge. It's something that feels like a spiritual realization, but which is simply based upon not looking deeply enough at our experience. It's based upon a misperception of our experience. Similarly, the next one he gives is others will have wrong liberation, we will have right liberation. So right liberation is complete liberation from greed, hatred, and delusion. So the complete purification of the mind from all defilements, from all harmful states. So wrong liberation would be an experience where one feels like there is liberation of mind, but one still has the tendencies towards greed, hatred, and delusion. One has not removed or eliminated those from the mind. Then he mentions 3 of the 5 hindrances. So here it's translated as torpidity and dullness, which I don't know what I was thinking. I don't particularly like the word torpidity these days. The Pali word is tina midda, which more commonly I translate as dullness and drowsiness, or simply as dullness, because it's not necessarily referring to sleepiness, but rather to this blurry, hazy, unclear state of mind. This hazy mind which doesn't really know what we're feeling, doesn't really know what we're experiencing. It's a foggy mind, which sometimes leads to sleepiness, but ultimately it's the mental fogginess that we're concerned about here. So we're trying to free the mind of fogginess. We're trying to cultivate a sharp and clearly aware mind. Next one, others will be agitated, we will not be agitated. So cultivating tranquility. So both physical tranquility, so keeping the body peaceful and steady, but more importantly, mental and emotional tranquility. Keeping the mind peaceful and steady as much as possible. And noticing what we do to agitate our mind. Noticing the choices that we make, how we choose to direct the mind, how we choose to move the mind in ways that stir up agitation, and trying to break those habits, making a conscious effort to cultivate peace of mind. So one of the major things that we use meditation practice for is to help to cultivate peace of mind, to help to learn how to stop agitating our own mind. Next, others will be skeptical. We will be beyond skepticism. So in Buddhism, we're not required to blindly believe in anything, but we are strongly encouraged to have an open mind. So be open to the possibility that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. Be open to the possibility that there's more to reality than what we're currently seeing and feeling. We're not expected to blindly believe in anything in particular, but we should also not blindly reject anything in particular, because that's just as foolish, if not more so. So skepticism is the rejection of something which we do not have complete reason to reject. So being open-minded, that would be another way of talking about being beyond skepticism. It's to be open-minded, to be open to the possibility that our current perceptions and viewpoints are limited, incomplete, and possibly wrong. Actually, they're definitely wrong, to be perfectly honest. Next, others will be angry. We will not be angry. Again, loving kindness meditation helps a lot with this one. Others will be resentful. We will not be resentful. So not holding a grudge. So if somebody else does something that we disapprove of or that we dislike, we forgive them and we move on. We recognize that that person is overcome with defilements and confusion, and as a result, they make mistakes sometimes, just as we do. And that to hold on to a resentment towards that person, one, it makes us unhappy. So to hold any kind of grudge makes us unhappy. Two, it's unrealistic, because holding a grudge is based on the assumption that the other person is not changing. But everybody is constantly changing. So the person that we resent doesn't exist anymore. That person has already changed and moved. They've shifted. So holding a grudge, it makes us unhappy, and it's also based upon a misperception of reality. It's based upon a failure to recognize impermanence. So it doesn't do any good to anyone. So others will be resentful, but we will not be. Next, others will denigrate, which means to insult or to put down others. We will not insult others. We also won't insult ourselves for that matter. So the Buddha doesn't distinguish between the two. Others will be malicious. We will not be malicious. So malice, the wish for others to be harmed. Again, this is something which is antithetical to Buddhist practice. Others will be envious. We will not be envious. So the antidote to envy is what's called in Pali mudita. So mudita literally means rejoicing. And it's usually defined in particular as rejoicing in the good fortune of others. So when we see somebody else getting something that we want, then instead of envying them, instead of being jealous, instead we cultivate joy at their good fortune. Oh, how wonderful for them. How wonderful that they got something that they like. How wonderful that they got something that's beneficial to them. Isn't that lovely? We're bringing up that state of mind so that there's no room for envy and jealousy to land. Others will be fraudulent and deceitful. We will not be. I spoke about that yesterday. Others will be stubborn. We will not be stubborn. Some of us find this one a bit challenging. So stubbornness, so rigidity or obstinacy, this tendency to refuse to back down from our opinions, to refuse to back down from what we insist upon. Well, what is that based upon? Based upon self-centeredness. This is my way. This is my opinion. This is my standpoint. And it's based upon a lack of consideration for others, not considering how our stubbornness is obstructive and harmful to others. So this doesn't mean being foolish. If you're standing upon something that's really valuable, really important, like feeding the cat every day, for example, then yes, it's important to make your point. It's like, yes, we should feed the cat every day. I agree. But not being stubborn about things where there's no point in being stubborn, which is almost everything, by the way. You are feeding the cat every day, I assume. Okay. Others will be conceited. We will not be conceited. So again, I spoke a bit about conceit yesterday, so I won't go over that in more detail today. Except just to remind you that this actually is a summation of all Buddhist practice, can be summed up in this one phrase: we will not be conceited. If we practice that one phrase completely and thoroughly, we can attain full enlightenment. Next, others will be hard to speak to. We will be easy to speak to. So this is a very literal translation. So suvacha means easy to speak to, but the applied meaning is easy to admonish, easy to correct. So easy for others to point out our faults to. This is another very challenging aspect of Buddhist practice. It's very difficult for many of us to admit that we're wrong. Even when we know that we're wrong, we don't like others to point it out to us. But the Buddha says over and over again that this is the basis of growth in Buddhist practice, which is mutual correction, mutual admonishment. So the willingness to give and receive constructive feedback about one's spiritual practice allows us to grow together in the path towards awakening. So cultivating this quality of being easy to admonish, easy to correct, and also cultivating the skill of delivering instruction and admonishment in a way that is easy for others to receive. So also being very attentive to time and place and manner in which we offer constructive feedback to others. Next, others will have evil friends. We will have good friends. Yeah, try not to have evil friends. Basically, try to develop friendships which are supportive to your spiritual practice. So try to avoid spending too much time associating with people who have harmful habits, people who are not practicing all the things on this list, or at least a few of the things on this list, or at least are trying to practice at least a few of the things on this list. So try to spend most of your time with people who are sincerely committed to a spiritual life, who are sincerely committed to being good people and becoming better people. Try to spend your time with people who are sincerely committed to developing wisdom and compassion. It doesn't matter if they aren't quite all the way there yet, because realistically, most of us aren't. But if they're trying, then that will support and encourage you in your practice as well. And they'll also appreciate support and encouragement from you. Next, others will be negligent. We will not be negligent. So the Buddha did speak in many places in the suttas about the dangers of negligence, the dangers of not paying attention to what we're doing, not paying attention to the consequences of our choices, not paying attention to how our decisions can have wide-reaching effects, which can bring harm to countless beings or can bring benefit to countless beings. So being very careful to pay close attention to what we're doing and what effect it's having on all the beings who are impacted by it. Next, he says, others will lack faith, we will have faith. Again, there's kind of this pervasive belief that Buddhism is not based upon faith. And that's partially true, but it's also partially untrue, which is that we do cultivate a genuine sense of confidence and trust in the Buddha, in the fact that there have been countless enlightened beings since beginningless time, that there was an enlightened being, a fully enlightened Buddha on this world not too long ago, confidence in the capacity that every one of us has to become like the Buddha, to reach that same pinnacle of wisdom and compassion. Confidence that the Dhamma is valid. Confidence that there is such a thing as absolute reality, that there is such a thing as a path to awakening, that it is possible for us to understand the Dhamma and to follow it, to practice it, to live it. And confidence in the Sangha, confidence that there are people who are practicing sincerely. And there are people who, through practicing sincerely, have been able to achieve the same achievement that the Buddha achieved. And also the confidence that comes through applying the teachings to our lives and seeing the results that come. So all of this cultivates faith. It cultivates this deep faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So faith is, in fact, an important element of Buddha's practice, but it's not the same as blind belief. Rather, it's the confidence that comes through understanding and experience. Next, the Buddha speaks about conscience and consideration, which are how the terms hiri and ottappa are translated in this translation. So hiri and ottappa are usually presented as a pair. Sometimes they're presented in isolation, but usually they're presented as a set. And together, they mean conscience. And actually, when it's presented as a compound word, hiri ottappa, I usually just translate it all together as conscience. Because fundamentally, hiri ottappa is our innate ability to know right and wrong. Our innate ability to know what is wholesome and to incline towards what's wholesome, and to know what is unwholesome and to tend away from what's unwholesome. So it's our basic ability to know right and wrong and to steer away from what's wrong and towards what's right. So when they're divided into two pieces like this, then on the occasion that I translated this sutta, which was quite a while ago, I translated hiri as conscience and ottappa as consideration. Because one of the traditional definitions is that hiri is wishing to avoid harming yourself, and ottappa is wishing to avoid harming others. So it's conscience towards oneself and conscience towards others. So here translated as conscience and consideration. Next one. Others will know little, we will know much. So we will know much in Pali is bahu sutta, which is defined in a number of places in the suttas as knowing a great deal of the suttas. Accumulating a stockpile of knowledge about the Dhamma, gathering as much information and knowledge as you can about what the Buddha taught. So this is another important quality which the Buddha speaks about in many, many different places, which is the value of gathering intellectual information about the Dhamma, not as some kind of mind game, not as some kind of academic scholarly exercise, but rather so that we have a clear understanding of the path to be followed. So that we have a clear understanding of what we're trying to develop. Because the better we understand the path, the easier we can follow it. And we do need to be careful here. There's a danger of becoming what's sometimes called an armchair Buddhist. So someone who just sits in their armchair reading books all day, which can be fun, but it's not necessarily productive. There's been a few famous armchair Buddhists in the Western world over the last 100 years, and none of them turned out particularly well. So we don't want to be like that. So we study, and study is very important, and it's very valuable. as a support to our practice, but not as a substitute for practice. Study itself is just mind games. It's just intellectual exercise. But study as a support to our practice can be incredibly beneficial. So we also don't want to go in the opposite direction of not studying at all or studying only very little. So the Buddha says here, others will know little, we will know much. So we don't want to be the knowing little camp. The people who don't study the suttas, the people who don't learn the Dhamma in detail. We don't want to be like that, because then we might go astray through not understanding the path. But we also want to make sure that we don't just spend all our time reading books about the Dhamma and not putting them into practice. There's a very famous Zen saying, a painting of a rice cake does not satisfy your hunger. In other words, just reading books about the Dhamma will not remove your suffering. It will not cultivate true wisdom. So we learn a lot and we put it into practice. That's how true wisdom arises. So here at the monastery, we have a study period every day. But we spend quite a bit more time engaged in formal practice than we do in study. Next, others will be lazy, we will be energetic. So this refers particularly to laziness in practicing versus energy in practicing. So not being lazy in how we approach our practice. It's like, I don't really feel like getting up for meditation this morning. I'm just gonna sleep for another hour or two. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's not the best idea. Unless you're really exhausted. If you're really exhausted, that's a different story. Then it's what makes sense. Or it's in the afternoon and you've got some free time and you're like, oh yes, I could do some studying. Ooh, or I could just lay here and read a novel. Yes, I like novels. I read novels. So this is laziness in our practice, and that doesn't do us any good. It's just wasting time. Just wasting time. And then we die confused. Doesn't bring us any good. So we need to make an effort to keep up momentum in our practice. And we also need to be careful that we don't push ourselves too hard, because this does happen sometimes. Sometimes we push ourselves too hard. We go past our limits, and then we start burning out. This does sometimes happen. But in my experience, for most people, it's the opposite problem. They're not really trying hard enough. Most of us are too slack in our practice. We don't put forth sufficient effort. But this is a judgment call that we each need to make for ourselves. And this also is where our spiritual companions can be of benefit to us. Often it's easier for others to judge whether we're trying too hard or not trying hard enough. So it's good to consult with your wise spiritual companions. Am I trying too hard or not hard enough? Then others will be absent-minded. We will have firmly established mindfulness. So again, the importance of being clearly aware of our experience. And when talking about mindfulness, it is good to refer to the Satipatthana Sutta, the sutta which explains the several different ways that we can develop mindfulness through paying attention to various aspects of our body and mind, and noticing that they're impermanent, noticing that they're constantly changing. So it's important to note that when the Buddha defines mindfulness, it automatically includes the practice of perceiving impermanence. Then he says, others will be unwise, we will be consummate in wisdom. this admittedly is pretty difficult, because if we were consummate in wisdom, we would be enlightened by now. But we make the effort. So one classification of wisdom that we find in Buddhist tradition is the three kinds of wisdom. Sutta maya panya is the wisdom that comes from learning, from hearing the Dhamma, from reading the Dhamma, from collecting information about the Dhamma. Second is chintamaya panya, which is the wisdom that comes from thinking and considering and reflecting on the Dhamma. So thinking deeply about the meaning of the Dhamma. And third is bhavanamaya panya, which is the wisdom that comes from practicing. The wisdom that comes through deep meditation practice, when we clearly see for ourselves what the Buddha was talking about. So to be consummate in wisdom means to develop that third kind of wisdom, bhavanamaya panya, the wisdom that comes from seeing directly into the true nature of reality. However, bhavanamaya panya is dependent upon the first two. So through studying and learning and thinking deeply about what we've studied, then we have a foundation, a basis for seeing deeply into our experience and seeing its true nature. And finally, the Buddha gives another challenging one. Others will hold tightly to their opinions and relinquish them with difficulty. We will not hold tightly to our opinions, and we will relinquish them easily. Because if there's one thing that we love, it's our opinions. And if there's one thing that we really don't want to let go of, it's our opinions. And if you're living by yourself in a cave in the middle of nowhere, maybe this isn't such a big deal. You'll still die unenlightened, but maybe not such a big deal. But it becomes much bigger of a problem when you're living with other people, when you're interacting with other people. Because holding tightly to our opinions and not being willing to relinquish our opinions, one, it causes no end of communal strife and disharmony. And two, it makes it difficult for us to progress along the path of wisdom. Because if our opinions were correct, we would already be enlightened. We are not enlightened, therefore our opinions are wrong. So we should be willing to relinquish our opinions. We should be willing to let go of our misperception of the world, because that's what's holding us back. So that's all the qualities that the Buddha spoke about, but that's not the end of the sutta. So the Buddha goes on from this. He says, Chunda, I say that even directing the mind towards wholesome phenomena is very helpful, not to speak of acting accordingly with body and speech. Therefore, Chunda, one is to direct the mind in this way. Others will be cruel, we will not be cruel. And he goes through the whole list again. So here the Buddha says, even directing the mind towards what is wholesome is helpful. So even just forming just the thought in your mind is already a step along the path. Because actually, if we constantly direct the mind in this way, then that will start to become the natural tendency of our mind. And the natural tendency of our mind becomes the basis for everything that we say and do. So if we constantly make this intention, others will be cruel, we will not be cruel, and so on, then eventually we'll start to actually live in accordance with it. So I mentioned earlier that there's some monasteries which chant this list every day. And that's one reason why, because if you chant this every day, then you're directing your mind towards it. And if you direct your mind towards it, then you'll start to act in accordance with it, which will bring you closer in line with the Dhamma, and therefore closer to awakening. Next, the Buddha says, Chunda, it is as if there was an uneven road, and there was a different road that was even, that one could use to circumvent it. Or there was an uneven ford, and there was a different ford that was even, that one could use to circumvent it. In the same way, Chunda, for a person who is cruel, there is non-cruelty to circumvent it. For a person who kills, there is non-killing to circumvent it. And again, he goes through the whole list once again. So here the simile he's using is built around this word visama, which I spoke about yesterday. So this word visama, which literally means uneven, not level, not a steady, stable surface to walk along, but which also has the applied meaning of unholy, unrighteous, unwholesome, dangerous, harmful, something to be avoided. So the wrong track, the wrong way, getting off the path. So he's saying it's like there's two roads. There's one road that's very rocky and uneven and dangerous, and there's another one that's very smooth and level and safe. So we take the road that's smooth and level and safe. Or a ford. So the ford is a place where you can easily cross a river, which used to be a really big deal back in the day when there weren't a lot of bridges. It was very important to find safe ways to cross rivers. It could be very dangerous to cross a river. So you tried to find a place where the river was very shallow, flowing slowly, where you could cross over without risk of losing your possessions or losing your life. So the ford then came to be a simile for spiritual practice, because spiritual practice is a safe way to cross from this shore, that is confusion, suffering, and unenlightenment, towards the far shore, that is enlightenment, the complete safety of the wisdom of knowing things as they are. So the uneven ford here means, could be taken to mean a kind of practice which is unsafe, which is dangerous, which does not lead towards awakening. So the even ford is the one that it's the smooth, level, reliable, safe, steady path towards the safety of the far shore, towards the safety of awakening. Next, the Buddha says, Chunda, just as all unwholesome phenomena lead down and all wholesome phenomena lead up, in the same way, Chunda, for a person who is cruel, there is non-cruelty for rising up. And he goes through the whole list again. So unwholesome things lead down. So down towards less desirable, less pleasant states of existence. And wholesome phenomena, wholesome things lead up. So leading upwards towards more pleasant, more desirable states of existence. And ultimately, if coupled with the development of wisdom, they can lead towards full awakening. Next, the Buddha says, Chunda, it is impossible for a person who is stuck in mud to pull another person out of the mud. Chunda, it is possible for a person who is not stuck in mud to pull another person out of the mud. Chunda, it is impossible for a person who is not trained, not disciplined, and not enlightened to train, discipline, and enlighten another person. Chunda, it is possible for a person who is trained, disciplined, and enlightened to train, discipline, and enlighten another person. In the same way, Chunda, for a person who is cruel, there is non-cruelty for attaining enlightenment, and he goes through the whole list. The simile that he gives here, it is impossible for a person who is stuck in mud to pull another person out of the mud. So this also we see in another place in the suttas where the Buddha goes into a bit more detail on this, where he clarifies that first one gets oneself out of the mud and onto dry, stable ground. Then you turn around and you help pull the other person out. So here he's pointing to the importance of trying to develop and stabilize our own mind a little bit so that we're more able to be of benefit to others. So it's not this selfish pursuit of, I want to get awakened and screw all these other people. But rather, it's this compassionate wish. I want to develop and steady my own mind so that I can also be of benefit to others. So here he gives this example that if we have not been trained, then we can't train others. If we are not well disciplined ourselves, then we cannot help others to be well disciplined. And if we are not enlightened ourselves, then we can't give enlightenment to anybody else. So we work on our own mind, not just for our own sake, but also for the benefit of others, so that we can be of more benefit to others. Then the Buddha says, Chunda, I have taught you a discourse on humility. I have taught you a discourse on directing the mind. I have taught you a discourse on circumventing. I have taught you a discourse on rising up. I have taught you a discourse on attaining enlightenment. Chunda, I have compassionately done for you what should be done by a teacher who compassionately seeks to benefit his disciples. Chunda, there are the feet of trees, there are empty buildings. Meditate, Chunda, do not be negligent. Do not do what you will later regret. This is my instruction for you. This is what the Blessed One said. Satisfied, Venerable Mahachunda delighted in the Blessed One's statement. So that's the end of this discourse. And I think that's all I have to say about it. Do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Bante. So, hello to Claudia, Jen, and Kevin, and Bobby, who all showed up, and Yudi as well. In the meanwhile, so Adriana says, "Oof, guilty on the stubborn."
Really? That's it?
Yeah, I think she's doing pretty well.
I go through the list and I'm like, let's see, guilty, 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 guilty. Working on it. I'm trying. Guilty, guilty.
So Jen's question is, does that include the want for the virus to go away? I think it's referred to something that you said earlier, probably.
The wish for beings to be free of suffering is a very important element of Buddhist practice. So no, there's nothing wrong with wanting the virus to go away, because that's wanting people to be happy, healthy, and safe. So that's the mind of loving kindness, the mind of compassion. So that's a very wholesome and important element of Buddhist practice. So yes, by all means, wish for the virus to go away. Wish for people to be healthy. Wish for people to be safe. That's a good thing to wish for.
Thank you, Bhakti. And Claudia asks, why is there an equal emphasis on what others do instead of just teaching what we must do to achieve a state of humility? Pointing out the deficiencies of others seems to be the opposite of humility.
So actually, in most suttas, the Buddha just talks about the path. So it's one of the interesting peculiarities of this sutta that for each one, the Buddha says, others will do X, Y, Z, we will not do that. Or others will make the bad choice, we'll make the good choice. So I think what the Buddha is doing here is that he's removing any possibility of making excuses. It's like, oh, well, my friends do it, therefore it must be okay. It's like, well, no, others will do that stuff, but we won't. So it's making it clear that we cannot use the behavior of others to justify our own choices. But rather, no matter what other people do, we will always make the wholesome choice. We'll always make the spiritual choice. We will always make the morally upright choice. So it's true that we shouldn't fixate on the bad choices that other people make. That's true. But we also should not use other people's bad choices in order to justify our own. So I think that's the main thing that Buddha is getting at here. Okay?
Thank you. And Kam asks, Bante, what are practices to overcome dullness in meditation and living the daily life?
Yeah, this is a very common issue. I had a lot of struggle with this one in the first few years of my practice. A lot of problems with dullness uh, and sleepiness. And one thing which can't be overlooked because it actually is important is to make sure you're getting enough sleep. Often we push ourselves to try to do more and learn more and accomplish more, and then we wind up cutting short our hours of sleep. Um, and if you're not sufficiently rested, then you will have a very hard time maintaining mental alertness. So make sure you actually are resting enough, not too much, but enough. Then in your practice, cultivate strong, sharp interest in your meditation method. So really cultivating an attitude of fascination with your meditation object. So cultivating the attitude that it's the most exciting thing in the entire world. Then you won't fall asleep. So sometimes we think that things are either interesting or boring, but that's actually not true. What's true is that we either choose to be interested or we choose to not be interested. So choose to be interested, and then you won't be dull minded. You won't want to miss a single moment of it. Okay? Next question, please.
Bobby asks, so is mudita like the happiness you get from giving a gift?
Yeah, that's a part of it. But with giving a gift, you also get to rejoice in your own generosity, which makes it even better. Okay. Other question?
Kevin asks, with the joy for others bit, especially for their material success, to uproot envy, wouldn't centering on emptiness and or impermanence be just or more effective?
It can be. So, yeah, reflecting that all things are impermanent and insubstantial is actually a very direct way of cutting through all defilements, not just envy. Uh, but sometimes it's too subtle, it's too difficult, and we need a method that's a bit coarser, a bit more of a blunt instrument, something which more directly counters the problem. So mudita directly counters envy. So especially if we have a strong ongoing defilement of some sort, some persistent tendency, then we need to use direct counters rather than using something that's too subtle or too indirect. Okay, next question.
We're done with the questions, but we have a comment from Jen who says prostrations before meditation can also get the blood flowing.
Yes, that's true. Also, walking meditation. If you do a few minutes of walking meditation before sitting, and especially like good vigorous walking, so like not like the glacially slow walking meditation, but something about a normal walking speed, or even a little quicker than a normal walking speed, that can help to invigorate the mind. Especially if during the walking meditation, you really focus very strongly on feeling your body. So, walking a little quickly, focusing very strongly on your body, then you'll notice the mind starts to become very awake and alert. And then when you go to do sitting meditation, you'll often find that the mind stays sharp and clear. So, yes, thank you, Jen. Prostration practice can be a very valuable way of cultivating not just energy, but also a genuine sense of faith and affection for the Buddha.
And Jens asks, can you discuss charnel ground meditation and reflections on death to counter dullness or laziness?
Um, I think probably not today. Yeah. Another time. I talk about those meditations from time to time, but I think not today.
Maybe we can do a special session. Generally, this is a favorite topic of Bhante's. So maybe we can dedicate an entire session to it. Mehmet asks, according to the last part, can someone not enlightened not train or discipline others?
So I actually interpret this set as being three. So one who is not trained cannot train others, one who is not disciplined cannot discipline others, and one who is not enlightened cannot enlighten others. So I take it as three. But I also don't interpret this as being absolute statements, but rather general principles. So generally speaking, if you've received good training, if you've trained yourself well, then it's easier for you to help others in their training. It's easier for you to train others. If you're not well trained, then you won't have any clue how to train others. Or you might have a general idea, but it's difficult if you don't have personal experience. Similarly, in the case of enlightenment. So this does make things a little bit challenging because, for example, I'm not enlightened. So my ability to help others attain enlightenment is therefore a little bit limited. But what I can do is I can talk about what I know, and I can talk about what I've practiced, and I can talk about what I've learned. And hopefully that will give others a scaffolding and foundation, which then they can improve upon and build upon. So it's also important to keep in mind that ultimately nobody can enlighten you. Only you can enlighten you. Nobody can awaken you. Only you can awaken you. So ultimately, our practice is always something that we do ourselves. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you, Bhante. Yes. Kevin has one last quick question. For the additional ninth factor of the path, right insight, isn't that basically the same as right view?
To some extent, but I think here the distinction the Buddha is making is between right view in its more ordinary sense, in the sense of opinion and perspective, belief, versus right knowledge or right insight in the sense of that deep, direct knowing of reality as it is. So those two final qualities, right knowledge and right liberation, are equated with full enlightenment, with becoming an arhat or Buddha. Whereas right view, sammaditthi, is something which is possessed to a limited extent by anybody who has a good knowledge of Buddhist principles, possessed to a deeper extent by a stream enterer, and possessed to its fullest extent by an arhat. So there's these layers of distinction with right view. So lots of people have ordinary right view. Some people have some degree of transcendent right view, but only an arhat has the deepest, most complete manifestation of right view. And that's the level which I would say is synonymous with sammajnana, so right knowledge, right insight. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Bhante. So I think we are done with the questions from this morning. Actually, maybe not. Mehmet just wrote, thank you. Also asked my previous question since there was a sutta about Sariputta when he first enters the stream after he hears the words of the Buddha from someone not very developed in training. Okay, so it's more a comment than a question. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, Bhante, for sharing the Dhamma once again. So this evening, we will have another Bhante that I'm going to show you right now. Bhante Sanata Vihari. He is visiting from California and kind of actually got stranded here because of the virus. So he's kindly sharing the Dhamma with us. This evening, he will be guiding us in meditation, metta meditation. And then I think the talk is on the Brahma Viharas, if I remember correctly. Or
It's the first one, something with emotion, something about emotions.
Okay, something about emotions is coming up tonight, and then I think tomorrow then it's the Brahma Viharas.
Yes.
So we will be we spoke about it here, and we decided to do this every morning at 8 a.m. There will be Sutta study. And then every evening at 7:30 p.m., we're going to be doing meditation and Dharma discussion. And then during the weekends, there will be also some extra talks, etc. In particular, in this Sunday, we're going to do our first day-long meditation retreat. So intensive Vipassana. So we'll have several different talks. And then next weekend, we'll do our first weekend retreat online. So lots of good stuff coming up. More Dhamma, less drama. Keep up with your practice all together. If you have any feedback or anything that you want to for the monastics to talk about, please send us an email at info@buddhistinsights.com. And yes, see you all soon. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.